Hey guys, Mochi here, and we're back with the Dragoncraft Altersphere Take 2 Draft Infographic. I was going to start things off by just talking about ramp in general in Dragoncraft, but then I realized that I mainly just cover over Dragon Oracle. Like, these two cards are sort of like their own category of ramp, and Dragon Oracle is sort of like a corner case, like a special case of ramp. So I'll just go over it when I just go through it in the natural order, and then it'll just be more natural from there. So starting things off, we've got Jabberwock, Nightmare Spawn. So this card's pretty cool. It's got a can't attack clause, which carries over onto the Evo. And then you sort of want to scale it up by just banishing followers from the deck. The problem with this card is just it's uncontrolled. Like, you banish two cards from your deck by the end of your turn, both on the Fanfare, and then at every end of turn, it just banishes things from the deck. But the things you're banishing, like if you just carve out naturally like a high density of 2-drop, 3-drop, it's going to banish those cards from your deck. So even in the mid to late game, you're still bound to have like maybe 1, 2, or 3 of those in your deck. So maybe it eats like a 2-drop and a 3-drop. It ends up being 8/8 or something. Like, your opponent can still interact with these with this card, and then it doesn't attack on Evo, so you can't trade reliably with it. And then just you don't get the condition and you don't get the attack. So this card's just sort of a sitting duck. And then the opponent can just, go face, ignore it, or they can remove it if they need to, like trading everything into it if it's, like, honestly a giant deal. But for the most part, it's not going to be a big deal. They'll have the removal for it, or they'll be able to just snowball board from there because you played something that couldn't interact with board. So in terms of, like, just big game finishers, there's definitely better things you can pick that are more reliable than this card. So speaking of a late game finisher, we got the biggest of them all. The 10 play point 10/10, you can choose it to be the Storm Ignore Ward, or you can just draw a bunch of cards and get the heal. So yeah, Lindward's a very cool card. We've seen constructed decks based on it, and you can like draft some cool take 2 decks with it. Like, just draft a bunch of removal, card draw, some value game amulets maybe, and then you can like try to make a viable Lindworm deck, and like you can make it work every once in a while, and you can definitely have a fun time doing it. But in terms of just reliability, you have a really good late game stuff you can definitely be taking over this card. And like, just being a 10 play point 10/10 most of the time just isn't gonna cut it, because again, it dies to removal. It's like super vanilla on board, and then comes down way too late in the game to sort of make an impact. So Marduk, maybe you'll just think, oh, maybe I can just play a bunch of big stuff over and over again. But again, this is just a fatty that has an anti-follower benefit. So like that enough can just make you lose the game. They can like fill you up with wards. They can remove it pretty easily, which is something you probably actually want. But you can't really make use of the spell draws because Dragon's not too like spell heavy. They'll just draft the removal, but they'll play it whenever they need to. And the same thing, like the amulet count is like extremely low, so you can't really make good use of the effects. And it's like super conditional anyway. So for the most part, it's just gonna screw you over with the anti-follower clause. So this card, it's pretty cool. It ends up being a card draw most of the time. You'll use it as that, and you'll be like reasonably happy with it. Maybe not as being a rare pick, but like you can definitely use it as a 3 play point draw too, and it's perfectly reasonable. The problem with this card is just 0/6 on just vanilla. You have to scale it up yourself. Sometimes you don't end up with enough spells in your deck, and you have to like take this card, and then it's just stuck being a card draw, which is perfectly fine. But when you want to make it broken, or at least make it unfair, like get it to 3 or 4, you definitely have to work for it and have sort of a deck that sort of supports it. And that's not even like the most unfair thing you can do at like higher play point cost for Dragon. So it just ends up sort of here because it's unreliable to scale, and most of the time it just ends up being a card draw, which you get at the legendary picks. So again, same thing with Jerry, your 15 or 30th pick. If it ends up being good, it'll end up being good, but definitely not safe to draft, especially like Dragon. They have a bunch of stuff that they sort of want to draft in multiples in the lower rarities. So Apostle of Disdain, it sort of like ends up here, like not here, but like sort of here, because it trades decent sometimes, like 1/5, you can ping off something, you can maybe complement a 2-drop and like ping off something. But the disdain clause sometimes helps it. Like, you can definitely get some random stuff going for you, but it's not too reliable, especially because you have to sort of combo it, and this can sometimes just be a 4-drop, and you have to just drop it down and evo it in the most part. So it sort of becomes like a 5/7 after taking damage, and then it like scales up. So it's like okay, it's not like super unfair, but it doesn't suck, and you can like maybe do some Craving Splendor combos with it. But just sort of in between here. It's not too great, but not too bad either. So Zoe, This card ends up just being an insight most of the time. Like it sounds sort of good, but like maybe you can just use it as a late game finisher, you know, do 14 damage. You actually get the weaker version after shuffling it back. Maybe you can like tail swing it to get the combo and lower it that way. But it's just unreliable. Like in the late game, if you just top deck it, you still have to draw it again. And in the early game, you'd rather not have the Zoe in your hand because it sort of wasted a draw. Because you still have to do all that chip damage to get them into that life total. Because unlike Constructed, sometimes you don't end up with like a bunch of storms in your deck that can sort of like double combo where you get the Zoe turn to prevent you from losing the game that turn, and then you have more storm follow up. You actually have to do all the chip damage from the before you play the Zoe. Otherwise, it's like super unsafe. Like you're not gonna just drop this down as like a value or a removal piece because you're just gonna die because you're at 1 defense. But yeah, it ends up being like okay as like an insight with like some win condition fluffiness attached to it. So Dragonflight Warrior. The win condition thing about this is like sort of unreliable because again, same thing, like you don't have too many amulets and like the spells are generally used in the early game. So sometimes this can end up with nothing in the late game. And then just being a 8.77 board, that's not really good enough. It's just too vanilla on board to sort of make an impact. But sometimes it can just be unfair enough, especially if you're pressuring a lot. Like the opponent might not have the removal for it, and then it just ends up being just okay as just sort of a late game big thing. So Legendary Fighter, you know, it ends up being a fighter most of the time, but you know, you can make use of it. Like amulets aren't really too big of a thing, but maybe you can just evolve something like a Serpent Drake or something, and then it just ends up getting the double attack, and the opponent has like priority targets to remove or something, or just playing a spell and just giving it Bane is just good enough. So, you know, filler plus, you can definitely take it higher, but it's nothing too big to write home about. Just a fighter with upside. So Moon and Sun, like, it doesn't end up being that good in Dragon because in the overflow turns or just the late game, like, you have definitely, like, more unfair, like, bigger things to play in the late game. And then if you want to weave it out, sort of get the infinite value going as a 3 play point like spell, Amaterasu and Tsukiyomi, they aren't like too strong, like relative to like sort of the overflowy things you can do. Like you have stuff like the Griffin back and the Dragonclad where they're definitely stronger plays on board. Like your opponents, like I won't say they're trying to like be defensive against you, but like you're trying to be at least sort of aggressive against them. And you know, Moon and Sun doesn't really make too many aggressive boards, especially like with like Tsukiyomi being the aggressive one, being able to be just, you know, pinged away so easily by your opponent. So and then they only have to deal with like something like a Griffin Guard where you can just do something like this in the overflow turn, and that's like much stronger and much harder to deal with. And even though like the infinite value thing can be a thing, it's not too amazing in Dragon, in my opinion at least. So Disdainful Rending, this card actually benefited a lot from the draft changes. You can respectively just draft it higher now. Because like before you drafted like a Rending or two, like maybe you end up having like a bunch of random Disdain, pseudo Disdain cards that can sort of make it better. But for the most part, it just ended up pinging a follower and then pinging the opponents. It's just like super fair, like above average fair removal. And like sometimes that ends up being good enough. But the problem is it sort of like consumed your your golden legendary picks, and that was like a big problem. So it's not like too good before, and now it's like much better, and you can definitely respectfully take it higher. So the Haste Wing, this card's pretty cool. The problem is like the invocation condition's like super hard to proc. Like it's basically impossible. Like you have to draft a very greedy, maybe like a ramp deck or a very greedy deck, and then you have to draw all those cards late game, and you can't draw this from the deck. But just being like a 4 play point 3/3 storm, you have to wait until overflow. This actually removes it completely. Like if you read the description, like I scripted or I templated this differently, but you might see it in like, you know, the in-game or something. It might say like storm on Evo. The fanfare actually removes it, so it actually doesn't have anything on Evo if you play it before turn 7 / overflow. So it's just like a vanilla in the early game, which is like good enough. And then like late game, we can storm, interact with stuff. It's like reasonable to take as sort of like an above average Goliath with like random invocation upside sometimes when you randomly have a really high greedy deck. So Gilney is just it's Dragon's not as sticky. Like I do believe Dragon wants to play more aggressively in this expansion, or at least, and but it's just you don't have as sticky boards as like Forest and Dragon, or Forest and Sword, to like make use, like heavy good use of Gilneys. You have like better late game to take, like just good stuff, vanilla stuff to take at higher play point costs. So you definitely don't have to fall back on a Gilneys, which might end up for the most part, just dropping down on sort of an empty board where you want to establish again or drop like a good late game threat, where this thing's just sort of good when you're snowballing. So Dragon Cleaver, it's got that nice utility where it randomly does 6 against Dragon, but that's just a fun fact. But just on turn 5, you can just get a free ramp if you're on low pressure or you're neutral in the game. And just a 5 play point, 2/2, deal 3, that's super valuable, especially when you can like dodge evoing. And just the fact that you can play it, it's sort of like a gold version of Vulse, which is already a very good Swordcraft card. Just free interaction, free ramp if you can afford it, is just perfectly good card to take. So Force, I had it like jumping around before, like it's definitely like around here. And you can respectfully take a lot of these cards sort of higher. But just Force ends up just being just a good stuff removal, like very premium for what it does. Like your opponents will definitely not play around it. It's just like sort of fair at times when you're sort of like, I won't say neutral on board. Like if you're playing very aggressively, like you'll definitely appreciate it still. But like even when you're playing defensively, it's still okay. It's just like, you know, you have to commit a lot of your turn, you know, 3 play point or 5 play point. That's most of your turn gone, and then you're just removing stuff. Sometimes you don't remove everything. But like it's good for its cost, and it definitely does the job. And the fact that it hits face is like a very good bonus. So Pure Voiced, this card's actually like sort of unreliable, so it might like jump down a bit. But the fact that in the late game you get like the heal, which is pretty relevant, especially if you're playing defensive draft. And then the command, you can use it as like card draw. You can get the Dragon and the Wind Blast immediately if you need to use it in a pinch. Or you can save it for turn 10, and then you get like a Dragon and a Wind Blast. So 10/10 in stats with 5/5 able to interact with both face/followers is like very good value for just a 4-drop. You can weave it in with like one of these in the late game, and then during you can heal if you need to, or you can again get a super value storm/value engine going for you. So True Dragon, this card ends up being like super weird because it's just like a 5 play point 5/3, but like the fact that it ramps you like 5/3 once it evos, it ends up living a ton of things. And then free value when it overflows is great. But it's mainly the fact that it ramps you. It skips your turn 6, which is one of Dragon's most awkward turns, because like turn 5 you have like a bunch of stuff you can sort of play. But turn 6, there aren't too many things that you can play on curve that are good. So the fact that you have something that lets you skip the turn 6 is definitely high value, in my opinion. So Dragon Empress, this card's very interesting. Like 1 play point, you get just the rush, but you won't do that. But the Vanguards are like, okay, it's like sort of fair, you know, 7 play point 3/5, and then you get a bunch of distributed pings. Like maybe you'll just play them and then they'll all like live. You just won't trade them, or you'll have a neutral board or an empty board, and then it ends up being like good to sort of snowball. The problem is you don't have like too many buffs to like abuse, unlike like other crafts that might appreciate this sort of effect. But the fact that like it trades well, like you can just play this, trade with like, you know, a 5/2 or something against a 5/2, and you have like a bunch of bodyguards left over. That's like perfectly reasonable as just a value/removal engine. So speaking of a removal engine, we got the Wild Flame Dragon. So people might be questioning this one. Like it sort of like jumps around here too, and I respectfully have it higher as well. But it's mainly just like sort of an unreliable thing. Like right, you can't really set it up with like, you know, Sneer, which is like the best way to sort of set it up. And like you won't have like random stuff to like ping for 1 to set it up. So your opponent's board has to be already like sort of damaged, which it very well could be when you're like playing sort of back and forth. But this is like turn 8, so like the Evo turns have all passed. Like maybe you're like snowballing your opponent a bunch, and maybe you can like just ram like a random 2-drop until like they're like 8-drop, and then get the free trade, and like that's super high value. But sometimes it ends up being the case where the opponent's like counter snowballing you, and they just maybe they have a couple small injured threats, but then they have the big threat, and this can't really interact with it, which is no fault to like this card. I mean, you know, it's perfectly balanced around the fact that it only hits damaged followers. The thing to note is it hits only opponents, so that's like a very good boon, unlike, you know, some other cards which might hit the entire board. So like it's definitely good enough. It's very good high vanilla stats, and it's mainly just sort of minor unreliability that sort of holds it back in my opinion. But it's definitely a very, very solid pick, especially as like a late game card. So again, Proto. So Proto might be a bit weird here, especially like Prince as well, because like these are sort of like constructed, like I won't say mainstays, but like sort of the ramp Dragon staples. But in my opinion, like at the moment at least, Dragon's sort of more of an aggressive mid-range game plan. And like speaking for Proto first, at least, you know, Proto might actually wipe your board, like if you're being sort of aggressive about board. But again, it can sort of be higher defensive drafts, all that kind of stuff, and you know, it's definitely good enough as a standalone card, especially in Dragon, where you can sometimes have just decks that ramp it out or play more defensive. And, you know, this ends up being a very premium removal. So on Prince, yeah, Prince ends up being perfectly reasonable in this craft, just like in every other craft. Just your late game finisher if you want it. Like, I consider Jerva sort of, I won't say better, because, like, they do different things in a different way. But, like, Jerva's, like, interaction on board. Like, this one, you need safety on board, but, you know, Dragon's perfectly fine at just having safe boards. As long as you don't, like, you know, get too happy with, like, the ramp or, like, just anti-tempo stuff. But, again, you can take it higher respectfully, and, you know, you'll definitely be happy with just having a Prince in your deck as just a late game inevitability. So, White Frost. This thing gets the super good in take two, just because the Whisper is basically a pitfall. In the Evo turns, like, anything they Evo into your stuff, barring, like, you know, Rick Hams and stuff, it just ends up being removed for free, and the opponent has to always, like, have it in the back of their mind. This thing's, like, also doubles. You can just Evo it on turn 4, and then, you know, it sets up the ping itself. You can just ping off something else, trade in, and then keep the White Frost in hand if a trade ends up being that way. It's just super high value for, like, a 2-play.13, like, value engine, threatening removal, just a bunch of stuff that ends up being super good. And the Whisper can even be used as a 1 damage ping in a pinch, which is, like, all, like, super high value. So Masamune, as a joke, I had him, like, over here before, like, representing the old Masamune. It's sort of unreliable. Like, getting to turn 10, like, Dragoncraft followers, that doesn't really matter. Like, the fact that it's 2-play.22 Bane, that's already good enough. Like, there's basically no opportunity cost to draft him. You can just draft him and just throw him away whenever. Like, you'll actually find that you don't actually get this effect off that much. Not because you have to, like, wait a bunch for it. It's just mainly the fact that you can just, you know, pressure people out with 2-play.22 Bane. And, like, that's good enough. Like, you don't want to just have this in hand as, like, a power play and just have this rod in your hand. That's, like, one of the bad ways to use it, or one of the bad, like, traps of having, like, a really powerful enhance effect where you just hold it into your hand forever, even when you should just throw it out. And you should definitely throw it out more than you just save it. But definitely, you know, in the later game turns, you should definitely see, you know, I have a bunch of random big dragon cards, or, like, a bunch of mid-range things I can throw alongside it and get, like, a high value trades off it. But sometimes throw it out for value, and you'll be very happy regardless. So Power Forge, you know, just standard, what's that card called? Oh, it's not called, like, Wild Hunt. I know there's a card that this card power creeps. I believe it's, like, Dragon's Cry or something. But yeah, just 2-play point, just do that sort of effect. You can, like, Evo a 2-drop and then use it as, like, that Lorina's Fist or something. And then just 7-play point, that's where it really shines, because you got a dragon off it. So it's like a super dread dragon, like a 5/5 and then ping 5. That's already, like, high value. Like, post-evo interaction, threat plus removal, that's all stuff you value very highly. And then, like, you know, just 2-play point, you can use it, weave it into your evo turns, and then just use it in a pinch. That's, like, something I value super highly. So Pyram, this the Lightning Blast actually ends up sometimes being important. Maybe you can use it against Primes or something in the Portalcraft matchup. But the fact that this is, like, super high value just on the Evo, you draw this on your seconds, and, like, you can just win a game just because you played this card, because it gives you the small removal, big removal, and then, like, turn 5, you can use it as, like, a value ping too. Like, 5/5 ping 2 is, like, super high value. And, like, definitely a card you'll look for to just ease out your Evo turns as, like, a high value Evo card, which Dragon doesn't really have in, like, the lower play point costs. So Galmio, this card's very cool. You know, enabled, like, a very aggressive Disdain Dragoncraft deck, or just a general mid-range good stuff. It doesn't gain Evo stats on Evo, which is a thing to know, but I'm sure a lot of people know by now. But you know, just standard, you can Evo it on 5, just hit in to, like, maybe, like, a 4 or 5 or something, and then you ping out the something else. That's, like, very high value, especially the fact that it does chip damage after, which is something that's super important for Dragoncraft. Just do all your chip damage to get your finishers off, or just grind people out in the mid-range game. And then turn 7, you get a free AoE. The Dragon Wings on AoE is definitely valuable. It enables its own Evo. 5/4, it has to trade more difficultly, but it ends up being okay, and then you can ping something else for 3 after. It combos with, like, Disdain cards or, like, random Disdain stuff. Sometimes you get, like, multiple pings at once, and it ends up being super high value. The fact that it just trades fine, and the fact that it's Evo ping with, like, some conditional, but it's generally mitigated, and you can generally make the pings good for you, is good enough for you. So Warbreaker Dragoon. So during the mini expansion, I was like, oh, this card, when this came out, I was like, oh, it's like sort of okay, which I sort of had with for this card too. But it ended up being just good enough. Just the fact that it rushes in 6 play point, 5/5 is the same thing as like 6/5, like the Zeta stats, where it trades in super well. It's a threat. It snowballs even further if the opponent can't remove it. And the fact that it does snowball you, like it lets you drop things earlier that you shouldn't be dropping a turn earlier. And then it gives you a free buff. So all this is just a freebie, 6 play points, 5/5 rush. You'll be happy to take just the stat line on its own. The fact that it just has a benefit to just buff your Dragoncraft stuff in hand is just gravy on top. So Poseidon, I actually had him like here in like my initial impression of this card, not because like, oh, I underestimated. I actually thought Dragon was too fast to like appreciate this card. I thought, wow, the game's just end at turn 7, especially for me. Like I played Dragon a lot, and I was like, Dragon's like too fast to like play this card. But like, yeah, he ended up being amazing. Like just 8 play point, 5/7, 1/3s. The 5/7 is super hard to interact with, and then the 1/3s are like super good defensively. Like you can throw the accelerate out in a pinch, but you generally won't. Maybe you want to like evo something and protect it, but for the most part you're going to save it on turn 8, and you'll be very happy just dropping it down, having a bunch of protection for your entire board, for your entire face. And then mainly the 4/7, it gets to connect, it trades super well, and it gets to connect with face most of the time. So it's just a value mid-range tool, or mid to late game tool, and you'll be very happy to just pick it up. So Jerva, he sort of gets like better and worse over the expansions, but the fact that there's actually not too much to punish like the 10 defense anymore. Like Dragon's gonna be sort of aggressive now, so you're not gonna be like on the defensive end of beatings these days. So just being at 10 life is already not gonna be too common. So the fact that you can just drop this down pretty safely, like there's not too many things that like have like 2 turns that kill you from 10 life. So you can just get incremental value, just pinging off your opponent's followers every turn. And like eventually, like they're gonna run out of threats, or you're just gonna grind them out from just the free damage, and eventually they'll run out of stuff, and you just ping them to death with 5 damage. And yeah, Jerva just wins games on neutral boards, so definitely pick him up as sort of a 1-0 late game finisher. So altar plane, again, same thing, just your vanilla, lots of stats on board, dodge your duds, and you'll be very happy with this card as just a value tool. It's very funny, this ends up being like, I think like the biggest kind of thing that Dragon can play in the late game, and it's like a neutral card. All right, I guess we're going on to the silver picks. So Gazelle, she's actually very cool. Like she heals all your disdain stuff. The main problem is just in the early game. Like she actually evos pretty well. Like you can like drop a 3-drop, drop this, and then evo this, and then let 3-drop. I won't say it's protected, but they sort of want to kill the Gazelle because it has a bonus effect. But you can do some cool things with like disdainful endings and random like hitting stuff and then healing it again to make it able to take more pings or something, but it's just not very reliable. And then in the early game turns, it's completely dead. Like you have this rotting in your hand, like you can't really play it. You have to save it for evo turns or save it to combo with like a heal, and then like it's just a dead card. The opponent can trade with it anytime, so it's like not very good in that sense. And you can definitely like definitely dump it down here if you don't want to like try to cheese people out with a bunch of disdain synergies or something. So Dragon's Sanctum. This card ends up being very cool, just after Overflow, where it ends up getting the Trample or the Whirlwind. But the fact that you can just use it as a ramp, sometimes like defensive turns or during the Evo turns when nothing interesting's going on, you can definitely just throw it down, get the free ramp if you have some unfair stuff to go into. But otherwise, Trample and Whirlwind, it's always very interesting which one to choose. Just, just AoEing stuff or 2, or just getting the free kill on something random on board. And those things end up being like decent value. It's just like unreliable in the sense like, oh, which one do I pick on like a neutral board? And then like the ramp's like sort of delayed. It's sort of like decent, but it's not like too amazing. So Hatchling, this card's very cool because like in theory it's like super good, but like 5/7 ward got super like much better in this expansion with less divine retributions. But the fact that like it just doesn't do its job very well. Like you're curving out naturally and like Hatchlings in your hand, it just comes out too often. Because you have to have like I won't say high pressure turns, but you definitely have to put up enough pressure, or at least stay even on board, that the hatchling just has to come out. I've actually found that Black Scale Dragon ends up being, I won't say better, but it ends up being used a lot more. Like 6/2 AOE is decent enough, but the fact that it's like 6/2 it baits out a lot of removal. Sometimes they won't have it, but if you can get a good AoE off, you should consider picking the Black Scale more, because it's definitely like high value enough, especially if you can like check it that they don't have removal left for it. So the Heroic Dragon Slayer, this is probably my most favorite 2 play point 3-1 body, because normally they're like not very good, but again they got better with 3/3s in the format and stuff. But the hand spear is like super strong. This thing is probably this thing and this thing are probably one of the few things that are enabling Dragon to play aggro. Without this, I think the craft would, like, I won't say fall apart, but it would be much weaker. The fact that it can like play an aggro game and it just has reach in hand, like you can use it in the late game turns. You can just drop it down 3/1, ping for 3, draw a card. That's good enough. Like the conversion can be awkward at times, but you can use it as a demonic strike in a pinch, like in the sort of mid game turns, and sometimes it ends up working out. And generally it ends up being fine. And the stat line's better now, and it's perfectly reasonable to take 1 or even 2 as high aggro dragon. And sometimes it gets in for 6 damage in the early game, which is perfectly relevant for dragon. So after the nerf happened, this card became like a lot more awkward. Like before, it was like sort of a better Galua where it could draw the cards right away, but obviously not with the flexibility to get the removal. But like now, it's like super pressured to Evo on 6. And the problem with that is sometimes like on 6 you have to be like more defensive, or you have to like drop multiple things. The fun thing is it's your like only sort of good 6 drop that you can reliably get, which is perfectly true. But I don't feel like you want like too many, or like just 1 or 2 is like perfectly fine. But the fact that like 6.66 on Evo, like sometimes that's not good enough like pressure wise, and like drawing 2 is like perfectly fine. But again, like 6.44 in the late game, like sometimes the opponent just has the removal for it, or it's not too like strong on board. You definitely want to be playing like multiple followers at a time. Like you definitely don't want to just throw this down and then it gets removed and then you don't get value from it. So it sort of like falls off in the late game, which is mainly sort of why it sort of got dropped down. But it was definitely much stronger on turn 5, where it could have Evo on turn 5 and on turn 6. But this is more like a pick thing. Like you can definitely pick them up more. I just feel like 1's enough in the most part. So Elios, same thing. This card's a bit weird because it has all the makings of a good card. It gets like conditional ward and heal. Storm 4/7 Storm is like high value, 8 play points. I feel like it's more of like a play point thing. Like even the card like Noah for like Portal, when it was 9 play points, and it's like it's even higher value than this card. Like they just awkwardly drafted it because it was just so late in the curve. And I feel like that's sort of the same way for like Dragon. Like you only realistically need 1 in your deck, and like you're just sort of happy just having it as like a storm potential with like random trading applications. So like it's perfectly reasonable as like a 1 of. I feel like you just don't want to clunk your draft with like 2. Like 2 might be like too much for most decks, I feel, as like a win condition. Like you only need like 1 in your hand / resting in your deck, and I think you'll be happy. So the Disciple, this card's actually very interesting. I'm actually like sort of down on this card. I actually think, I won't say it's a trap, but there are definitely some bad ways to use it, and I don't think it's actually like super broken compared to like the other Disciples or just a card in general. You might think, 1 play point 1/1 that draws you a card that's like super OP. But and it is like, it can end up being super good if you get like the disdain synergies going for you. But think about like regular Dragoncraft. Like sometimes you just end up randomly pinging your stuff, and then the ping actually hurts you a lot. Like just pinging something, like obviously this thing won't be a 4/4 when it's on board. Like it's definitely gonna be trading. But I'll just, for the sake of argument, just say it's a 4/4, and like you just ping some 4/4 randomly. Like the fact that I ping this, I make a 2 play point removal live. Like the 3 damage removal. Like that's making it easier for the opponent to kill my stuff. And sometimes that can be like super detrimental. Like something like a 5/5. Again, this might not end up being 5/5, but for the sake of the argument, like if I ping this down, like before it'd be like, they can only kill it with really big stuff. Now they can use 4 play point removal, which is like a bit more common, or they can trade like multiple 2 drops into it. And like that's more common. And just the fact that sometimes it weakens your board to a point where the opponent gets an easier time removing it, and there's no way to sort of like test that. And but like again, it's still like upside on a 1-drop body. Like maybe sometimes it just whiffs, like it's the last thing in your hand or something. But you can definitely use it for unfair things, and it's definitely strong enough to warrant its placing. But I feel like it's not like super amazing. Like there's definitely downsides to this card that a lot of people might overlook. So Aliza, she's very nice, on the overflow turn. In the early turns, she can just be used as a, what was that card? The rush card in Sword, but, something Fencer or something. But yeah, just perfectly good as that. Blitz Lancer, that's the card I'm thinking about. Yeah, just used as that, that's perfectly reasonable. Just overcosted removal, but sometimes maybe you kill a token or something. And then in the late game, it just trades really well. It can trade with a bunch of like 2-drops and it lives, and then it's like super annoying. It dodges puppets on the clash and a bunch of other stuff that's like just good on overflow. So you'll be definitely happy to just pick up 1 or 2. It's interaction from the hand, and it's like on a follow or 2. So Dragon Soul. So just 3+1/2/3 draw a card. That's like perfectly reasonable. Like you'll be happy with the card. The card's not like super broken. Like maybe you can get some disdain stuff going for you. Like the Glacial is AOE for 1 that hits the entire board, and it's like a reasonable body. 7 play point. I believe it's 5/5 if I remember that correctly. Yeah, 7 play point 5/5, and just the fact that it AOE's board, its interaction for board enables some disdain stuff, and it's like value like on a drop. And the fact that, subtract 1 from the cost. Oh, I wrote this as a 2/2. Or 2/3. It's actually a 2/2. I said that wrong, but it's a pseudo 2/3 is what I meant to say from my notes. But that's already good enough. Subtract 1 is almost a Vira. Like, it evos pretty well for 4, and then it lives up to like 4-5 sort of stats. So, like, you'll be very happy with it. And sometimes it just dodges random, like, 2-drop removals, like awkwardness into it. So Waters, as a joke, I actually think it's true now, but in the past, Waters was actually draftable over Canyon, which might surprise people, but I've drafted like Waters over Canyon like several times, and it's a very strong card. Like Conjure Twosome was one of Rune's best common cards, which I got a lot of flack in the past for saying that, but I wish I could explain it more, so maybe I'll do a video on that later. But yeah, just the fact that you can use it for 2, 4, 6, or 8, or even 10, like, it scales super well. It's split bodies. You can evo it 4/4, split 2/2s. Like, it's just super strong, flexible, and curve. I actually think it's probably one of the strongest dragon cards now. Like, before it was like second best. Now it's probably in contention for best. So Griffinback. It looks vanilla at first, 4 play point 3/4, which it is, just ward, Goliath with ward. But just the fact that it scales so well in the late game, like 4/7, like that's already as good as like it doesn't trade or it's not as aggressive, but like 3/7 trades with basically everything, like mid range wise, which everyone's sort of playing that sort of game. So 3/7 trades with everything. It lives to tell the tale, and it's like super annoying to remove it. Like what the opponent doesn't want to commit hard removal to it. So 3/7 they have to commit like a bunch of small followers, which it definitely gets soaked up by this, and then just a bunch of small removal. Again, it doesn't trade with this very efficiently, so you're very happy with this card. The main thing is just getting to your overflow turns and just not having it like dead in hand or just rot in hand and having to dodge playing it as a Goliath. But it ends up being okay in that case too. But definitely for the late game upside, it ends up being super strong. So Galua, it takes the place back of this card where it actually ends up being, I won't say better, but more consistent in a sense where you can choose the draw if you need it, but like 9 play point 4/4 kill something, that's super value. You can get amulets, just getting the draw turn 7, just vanilla 4/4 draw cards immediately, that's super high value. You can bank the cards for later. This card's very good at keeping your opponent guessing too, whether you drew the value card or you're saving the removal in hand in like the later turns where you're just curving out perfectly and you have a random breath in your hand. But it's a bit weird which one to take, sort of. But if you're lacking removal, definitely like the Black Breath, especially for like a bunch of random late game threats that you're trying to dodge. So Dragon Oracle, I was gonna talk super high in depth in this, and I feel like I'm gonna stumble over this, so maybe I'll just go a bit minor in depth on this. So it's mainly just curve considerations, like you have to curve out with a bunch of removal in order to make up for the tempo loss, and then you have to curve unfairly, like you have to have like a Geovore or just some like random stuff turn 4. Turn 3, you have to get like 4-drop, 5-drop, 6-drop. You have to just be ahead on curve in order to make use of the ramp. And then your late game threats have to be like super good. And all this is relying on just really good draw order after getting like a turn 2 or 3 Dragon Oracle. You have to be like not anti-tempo on board, you have to have all your threats, and then you have to draw your late game finishers. All that's just contingent on just being a ramp deck. And like that's already hard enough to do in like Take 2. So it's definitely like unreliable in my opinion. So I don't consider ramp to be like, the sort of go-to strategy. But there are definitely like some fun decks. You can definitely like cheese out some like late game finishers and like have like ramp on top of ramp and definitely make some stuff work. But I don't just like it as a go-to. And like, turn 7 Trail of Light, that's like, decent. Nothing to write home about, but just card draw on turn 7 plus. Maybe you can ramp from 7 to 9. That's like sometimes okay. But the fact that just this costs a card and you can't really abuse it as well and construct it is just what holds it back. So Draconic Sniper. This card's pretty neat, but like unfortunately it's not too good. Like maybe you want to be super aggressive, but like it's just too vulnerable to removal. Like 2/2 dies to everything, and then 4/4 still dies to a bunch of stuff, and they can hard remove it in a pinch. But the fact that like this has to trade, right? Like the opponent's not, they can just hold back from attacking you forever, and they can just remove everything else. Like this thing's not gonna do enough chip damage. Like it's not like a Vagabond Frog. I mean, it's funny because it ends up being sort of like a Vagabond Frog as long as it can dodge the removals, and then it can just hit it in like a bunch for 4/4. But like that's not, you're not in like you're not super aggressive like Sword. Like you can be, but you're not as, you don't have as many tools as Sword to close out the game, like the buffs and stuff. So like it's okay, but like it's not too amazing. Oh no, you might be able to hear a phone ringing in the background, so maybe I'll just pause for a little sec and then just run it from there. Alright, Coda. So 6 play 1.52, like same problem with this card. It's got the can't be attacked, but like you're dropping it down, it's unreliable. These are this is the end of the Evo turns or the late game. Like the opponent can just remove it with random removal, and then you didn't really do anything. But like sometimes I believe it's super funny because there are some crafts. Maybe when I make the removal video, like there like Portal actually has a very hard time in the past. They had a hard time removing 7/4 Evo. You just Evo it for 7, and then they couldn't like substitute it and stuff, and it actually dodged like all the ancients and the radiant artifacts. So it's like very funny where like you could randomly kill a Portal opponent doing that. So that's a funny application. But like nowadays, like again, everyone has like 3 play point or 3 damage removal, 4 damage removal, hard removal. Like it's not reliable, and it doesn't evo very well to like trade. So definitely avoid taking it if you can, and maybe use it to like cheese out 10 damage if you randomly get it in your drafts. So Dragon Rider, this is mainly just a consistency thing, sort of like this. It just ends up not like being a 4/2. Like sometimes you can just weave it out, and sometimes you can like skillfully use it. Like turn 6, you can like bait it out, or drop this down alongside something you want to protect, or you can protect it yourself. And then it ends up being good. Even in the late game turns, you can just stack a bunch of overflow benefits cards, and then it ends up being super good. But it's sort of just vanilla because there are definitely like 2 drops that are better in the early game, and the early game I won't say matters more, but the early game you're definitely trying to get sort of a aggressive edge on your opponent, and this card doesn't really do anything for you. So Huntress, same thing with this. Same thing with this card. Mainly in the early game, it doesn't really benefit you. Even in the late game, like it's super hard to get off because this thing's basically never evolving. So you just have to have this card, and it trades like neutrally when it evos. It just crashes in and it dies for the most part. So it has to be on board, and then the opponent can just ping remove it. They can remove it with another 2 drop, and it basically doesn't do its job at killing not killing dragons, but killing big stuff. Unlike something like what was it, Momo or something in Swordcraft, where it could kill it efficiently with its rush. So Era ends up like I wasn't down on this card before, but I was like, oh, Dragon Nest, whatever, 2/2. This is a Forge Weaponry, but the fact that it gives a Dragon Nest, like it gives you the card back. Like you can use it to efficiently trade, drop the Dragon Nest immediately. You can get it after, barring like Banish, but like that's already good enough. Like the fact that it works super well with disdain cards, and then in the late game, just enhance 10, give +5/+5. It randomly like sets up lethal. It gives Dragon a lot more reach, which is something they definitely appreciate. So all that like just makes it like a decent buff card, which is like already super good for just being a buff card. The fact that you like just pick one up and you're pretty happy with just having one in your deck, and that's like a surprising thing to say with a pure buff card. So Albacore, I could swear like, oh, maybe this is like a happy pig, it heals for more, but whatever. No, it doesn't. But it's just late. It's super vanilla. Like if it had more defense, it would definitely be a better card. Maybe it wouldn't because you wanted to die and heal, and maybe a more defensive craft. But just it doesn't really trade very well. Like things like a 2 drop plus a random 3 damage removal kills it, and it like evos like averagely. Like 5 defense is definitely big enough for like a late game threat, but it doesn't live enough to sort of just threaten life totals, and mainly it's just a heal and like a vanilla body that it just doesn't do enough. Like you might just randomly end up with one in your deck, and it's like okay, but it's not like super amazing for like a late game drop. So Blazing Breath, this is your standard go-to 1 play point do 2. This is like the most efficient you can get for it, and like remove 2 drops, finishes off post evo stuff. definitely something you'll be happy to take out. It's just mainly just it's not, I won't say it's not efficient. Like this thing's basically just as efficient, and it costs around the same. And you don't want to overflow with these ones. Funny joke, but whatever. You don't want to overflow with these ones because you have like similar removal to take that covers more bases, and this one's like a bit more restrictive, only killing like 2-drops and stuff, and post evo stuff, and not as strong as something like this. But sometimes just being 1 play point less ends up being relevant, and you're definitely happy to take like 1 in your deck. So the Rim, this thing's like probably the best 2-1 that's in the format. Just the fact that it replaces itself. Like Dragon Nest gives Dragon like it's free healing, so like I won't say it beats aggro, but it just gives a small edge against aggro because you can just weave in the nest in the mid game turns, and it just gives a harder clock for aggro to deal with. And card draw in general, it doesn't cost a card and gives you the card draw as long as you can just weave it out, which you definitely have the flexibility to do it. And 2-1 vanilla enough stats where you can trade it with basically all 2-drops, and you're perfectly happy with that. Like 1-3s aren't too common and aren't too good for the most part, so 2-1 trades strong enough, and it gets you pseudo card advantage, so that's very strong in just a 2-drop bronze card. So Venom Tail, I had it like sort of high, like it was actually like lower before and then higher before, and then it sort of like ended up here. The main thing is it stops you from being aggressive, which I feel like Dragon wants. Like you can't just like draft like 2 or 3 of these and say like, oh, I'm an aggro Dragon deck. Like maybe you can like protect some random stuff on curve or something, and it ends up being like very good in the evo turns where if the opponent doesn't have like a Rakam, they have to like awkwardly evo like big stuff into it, where normally they might want to evo something big. They might have to like resort to like dropping something small and then wasting a removal, and then they wasted removal on like not a useless card, but something they might want to save the removal for. So like it ends up being valuable in sort of defensive gameplay, and you can definitely bump it up if you're playing a more defensive Dragon draft or playstyle, and it's like perfectly fine in that case. Like the fact that it doesn't evo or doesn't attack until overflow is generally a downside you can avoid like playing into, and it ends up being like strong enough, just Bane Ward. But again, I consider like these 3-drops just better in the game plan, where you're just trying to board people out, just get a bunch of chip damage, and just win from the mid to late game. So Geovore, this card has the benefit of just the stats are solid enough. You can evo it 4/7 ward, like ends up being about the same as this when it evos, and then like turn 7 onward, the free overflow tag that ends up being like sort of relevant if you manage to save your evo and have like a power play, like something to play alongside it to like protect, or to like this be a threat and then you have like another threat established beside it, and that ends up being okay. The main thing is just having the evo on turn 7 if you can manage to like save it, and then it ends up being like a bit stronger, and like it's a freebie, right? 7 play point or 7/7 on evo is like nothing to slouch at. You just played 4/4 and you can weave out something else on curve. So again, it's respectable in that sense. It's just not reliable just because it's a turn 7 evo, or turn 7 evo for the most part. And then, the evo turns are past turn 6 if everyone's pressuring. And Dragon actually likes to pressure a lot, or like anti-pressure. So, turn or 5/6 or where the evos generally, or 6 is where the evos generally run out. So this doesn't evo that much. So it ends up being just, a Rahab that doesn't gain stats. So Zealot, a fun fact, which I'm sure people who played enough Take-Two know, is this pings no matter what. So it doesn't matter if you ping your own follower, this randomly pings. So it's just a 2 play point 2/2 ping. So, power create, whatever. But yeah, that's already super strong. The main thing is the ping, like that sort of, I won't say drops it down. Like I think it's respectful enough to actually be here. Is like sometimes the ping hurts it, just like this one. Like sometimes the ping can be like, random allied. Like sometimes it pings off like a 5/1 that you're like trying to save or something like that. It's just random itty-gritty RNG that sometimes screws you over. Like sometimes you can get like a super combo where you get like Zealot or Serpent Drake, and it can definitely be higher in Disdain decks. But the main fact is like this one, I won't say this one's more reliable, but it's just a standard 2-drop that's sort of good, and this one can sort of screw you over. But for the most part, it'll end up being super good, which is why it's here. So Serpent Drake, the Enhance 8 is actually, I won't say not as relevant, but if you're enhancing this for 8, I won't say it's dangerous. Like the opponent can just have the hard removal for it. Like it's not the most unfair thing you can be doing. It. The thing you want to be doing is like having disdainful rendings and like evoing it. As a joke, this ends up being like your budget, not your budget orcas, your backup orcas, where you can evo this, and it ends up being roughly the same thing, where it's like a 5/4 post evo hit into something, you get Serpent Drakes. Fun fact, which I'm sure again most people know by now, is the Serpent Drakes that are damaged, they keep spawning stuff, so the opponents have to deal with those Drakes. And the nice thing is it's just concurrent value and concurrent advantage. The opponent has to deal with all of them. Like they can't just leave a 3-2 out because then always evo into a 3-4 and then trade with like Goliath-sized bodies. And then that's already scary because they keep multiplying and then the opponent has to deal with them. So just the threat of having them. Again, the main thing that I won't say holding is back because it'll definitely be, I won't say the best 3-drop, but it'll definitely be a strong 3-drop when some of the other stuff rotates, is just, some other stuff in the format that I consider higher priority. But you can definitely like pick these up and you'll be very happy with it, especially in higher disdain synergy decks. So Drakewing, this card ended up being like, I won't say average, but it's definitely, I won't say better than this card, but it does a lot of good things and it does some like not so good things. 5 play point 4/4 rush, like if you can manage to like trade it into something like post evo, like a common thing you do is you ram into like their 2-drop and then you just leave their post evo follower, because you don't want to like ram this in and leave their 2-drop on the board. So if you do that, like you take a bunch of pressure from the opponent, but maybe it's worth it in the value game. But just 5 play point 6/6 rush or 6/6 on evo. Like the fact that this evos and you can't make use of the rush is just the main like sort of downside. The non-follower thing is like cute. Like sometimes you can get like 1 or 2 buffs on it, but like it's not like too relevant anymore. So mainly just the fact that the rush sometimes ends up being not as good, and it's just 5 play point vanilla. Like there's other 5 play point stuff or other stuff you can play that's sort of better. But again, it ends up being late game interaction, and sometimes it ends up being better than this in the mid game, or even in the late game. Sometimes it ends up being better because it leaves a body on board. And so it's definitely like up there as one of the things you can pick as just a standalone good 5-drop. But it has again its downsides. So Tailswing, I love this card, but you can't like cheat out canyons anymore, which wasn't really a thing, but like it's still a thing to think about. But cheating out random stuff is very good. The fact that you can choose it. A rule of thumb is when you can choose something big or choose something small, you should choose something small, because the small thing is easier to weave out. You can like weave out random stuff on value. Like even if you have something like a canyon in hand, like turn 6 might not be the best time to play it. Like the opponent might play around it and then high pressure you, and then you might have had like some good plays in hand where you could have like weaved these out for cheaper if you discounted the small things. Like discounting a 3-drop to 2 or a 2-drop to 1, those are like super high value, and sometimes even like a 1-drop to 0. But it just makes it much easier to just curve out. So I consider just subtracting stuff from small stuff is better than big stuff, unless you have like something really, well, I guess you can't use this, like something really good to like cheat out, like a Jerva or something. But again, this is sort of down just because I don't like, depending on your draft, right? You can be more defensive and you might want more, but I don't consider like you need too many like hard removals to sort of take, because you're sort of like just having them in hand. And I sort of want to be an aggressive draft and dragon for the most part. So I just feel like you can just take the removal less, and you won't have it like sitting in your hand and being more reactive, where you can just drop maybe followers on board and try to like win off board. So Disdain, this is your 2 play point thief. It ends up being a thief a lot of the time. You can evo it and then crash into something, draw a card. Sometimes it draws 1 or 2 cards. It's anti-puppets. It has synergy with all your disdainful stuff. So it's just a freebie on top of a 2-drop. Like the fact that I can draw 1 or 2 cards off being a 2-drop is like already amazing. Like there's nothing more you can really ask for. Like sometimes it ends up being vanilla and that's like fine, but like it evos very well, and it's a very solid 2-drop to take, and you'll definitely be happy with like 2 or more, and again synergy with this and random stuff. Still Sneer, this is your 4 play point Staff of the Whirlwinds, but it doesn't hit face and it hits all your followers, so sometimes that's downside. It's actually much better in more defensive crafts, but the fact that it's just 2 play point deal 3, like you can basically always, as long as you like sort of dodge the enhance, like it's always like just standard just good stuff removal that you're very happy to take, and it has the bonus of just AoEing the opponent's board, and just for the most part the opponent's board, and then just having like just premium 4 damage removal that AoEs for 1. If you're playing defensive, you can like trade all your stuff away, and then you can like enable random disdainful synergy, which is like all very nice, all in one package. So Dragonclad, this is one of the more important cards in Dragoncraft. The fact that you can save this on for the overflow turns, it ends up being super strong, just dropping like a 4-drop or multi-drops alongside this thing. Like 3/4 is like super annoying to deal with. Like they don't have all they can't use this removal on like everything. And the fact that this comes down 3/4, it trades with all the late game stuff, and it's sort of annoying to remove because it dodges this removal after it gains the buff. And just being a Bane, being able to trade, and 3/4 is enough to like pressure opponents a lot. Like 3/4 Bane is like worth like 5 play points, and like same thing, similar theme to this card. This card's worth like probably like 6 or something. So the fact that you can like drop these cards on the overflow turns, you can have like a high tempo turn or two, and you can just win off that. So speaking of some very potent 3-drops, this card I feel like, I won't say save Dragoncraft, but this card's super important. I feel like it lets Dragon actually play aggro and get away with it, because it draws you the Handspur, which is super valuable in the late game. Just turn 7 or onwards, the Handspur ends up being good removal. It curves out super well too, so you can just play it as 3 play point 2/3 and then use the Handspur on the Evo turns. You can use it for face, you can use it to remove stuff, and just get the cycle in the late game as well. And the fact that, Dragon Wings is flexible as well. Sometimes maybe you have like a really good Dragon Wings removal turn, maybe you have like a random disdain stuff you can enable with it. It's just super high flexibility on already vanilla enough body that draws you like a very high powerful. This card is super high power for Dragon, and you're definitely going to take as many of these as you can. So that's why it's like sort of here in the hierarchy of 3-drops. So that sort of wraps out the bronzes. So I guess I'll go over the neutrals really quickly. Again, not too many changes, maybe like just a couple. But Lyria, just standard same old, just 2-drop with upside, downsides, but just randomly okay. It doesn't have the benefit of having like a lot of like token stuff to follow up on, so maybe it's not as good, but you can definitely make it work with like random neutral stuff to sort of get off it. But just your sort of standalone average-ish 2-drops sometimes if you make it work. So Investigation, go over this one too. Investigation's like okay, it's like not too great, but like it's not too bad. You can definitely like fall back on it. Like Enhance, like draw 3. Sometimes in more value Dragoncraft decks, you can definitely appreciate it, especially if like not too many card draw tools available to you in like the bronze picks at least. So Genesis, it actually works out like okay in a dragon. Like it's funny because back in the past when they had Basilisk, it was like sort of awkward because you get the Banes on this, and sometimes it ends up being like not as good. But there's enough stuff to sort of hit with it. It has benefits with like hitting the disdain stuff, and then it makes it awkward to trade both through the Bane and both through their abilities to take more damage. So like it ends up being like sort of okay, but again sort of unreliable. Same thing like font for card draw. You can definitely take it as one. I value it like a bit higher, but it's still like not too great. But a one of you can definitely fall back on it, and it's reasonable. So Armor Troll, it's actually okay in Dragon. You can be aggressive in your drafts, and it's okay, but like it's again nothing too amazing. Just a freebie 7-drop. Again, it's funny because it's sort of the biggest thing in Dragon, which is it comes for neutral as the theme. But yeah, it's just reasonable, just as if you're being aggressive. But if you're a defensive draft, you should definitely avoid it because you don't want it. You don't want it because it doesn't trade. So Steadfast, your standard 4-drop. You actually sort of are missing on like 4-drops you want to Evo on 4. So yeah, I definitely wouldn't take it as a 4-drop. But it's sort of like a filler thing that ends up being there. You end up just Evoing a lot of 2s or 2 and 3s or just 3s on their own. So, it's just there for you as just a random filler. Same thing with these ones, just filler 2-drops that you're perfectly reasonably happy to take. 3-drops sort of contested for this, but 2 3s, I won't say they're never bad, but they've fallen off, but they're still perfectly fine to take. And free chip damage is something Dragon will always appreciate, and just filling out the curve if you don't manage to get enough 3-drops is something that's decent value, average card. This card again, just 6-drop. You actually might want to take it higher, but like it's just fine as just being a 6-drop vanilla card. It's just funny because you don't have too many 6s to go for you, so you might actually bump it higher. But again, nothing to write home about. Again, no real changes here. Just your Paradise, just your value 2 to Evo for random free pings. Seraphic, again, you have all the removals you can sort of go for. Like the 2-drop removal is not as reliable. You're mainly getting it for the 6, and then you have better tools to have for the 6-drop. 3-drops contested, but Chaos is sort of better now. It's a perfectly reasonable card to take, and you'll be happy to take it. So Reyna, I had these 3 sort of like jumping around. Well, maybe I'll get to these ones later, but mainly you just don't have that sort of unfair thing going for you. Like Haven has amulets popping, Forest and Sword have sort of token cards or things that spawn that go for you. Dragon, like you just sort of like sit there, like you have like overflow stuff you sort of want to be playing in the mid to late game, so you don't really have those stuck in your hand. And then you're like curving out super efficiently, or at least you're trying to curve out like 2 followers at a time in those late game turns, or just dropping something big. You don't have like those like good Reina turns that other crafts sort of have, which is why it's sort of here. But like again, it's something big. You can definitely make it work with like random stuff. Unfortunately, you can't get it with this, but with the enhanced cluckiness. But just it ends up being okay. So font, it actually ends up being very good in Dragon. Just free extra reach, free extra trading. It doesn't have a lot of attack manipulation. So, card draw, attack manipulation, just extra chip damage, all that's, very good for Dragon. Same thing, Goblin Fighter, just value draws. The Goblin's good for curving out when you want to be more aggressive, and then the Leader is still good as a value engine. And they're both like really solid in Dragon regardless. I like to cover these together. So again, they're your sacks for turn 4. It's actually pretty good in Dragon too. The Keens ends up being fine in Dragon, and just throwing this down multi 2-drops or late game, you can just throw this down to cycle is perfectly high value. So Sword Angel gets a bump here because it ends up being alone a lot of the time, and then you can just use it as a decent 3+1 removal, and then you're perfectly happy because Dragon doesn't have those things like in Sword and Forest where you have like a lot of token stuff that sort of sticks on board. So you'll definitely have opportunities to put this out alone first. So again, Kai'Sa 3-drop slot is sort of contested, but you'll take it when you take it, and you'll be pretty happy with having the fallback Evo with like card draw and damage pings on it. So it's a reasonable card to take. This one I went over. So Apostle, same thing. Angel has its problems, but it's a perfectly reasonable card to take, and it'll end up filling its role very good. And random disdain stuff you can randomly get. And Dragon, it's not as big as you think it might be, but you can sometimes get some self pings on some big stuff and end up having a lethal here and there. So these two, I guess only the Angel got a buff, but again, the Angel's like good in Dragon just because of enabling like random disdain stuff to like trade better and then just get a free disdain trigger off. And then the fact that they're 6-drops, right? Dragon's sort of stressed to have just solid 6-drops, and these ones end up being good enough. Where in my opinion, like Dragon sort of wants to be aggressive in their game plan. So these fit the bill, and they're 6-drops. You don't have too many 6s to take, so they get the bump up. Well, more so the Angel in that case. Or Catalina's just generally good. So yeah, Lowen's just great value. You'll definitely take it even if you're clogging for on the 3-drop slot, because you can act him. You can use them as a 6-drop. You can use them as a 4-drop. You can just use them whenever because he's just super high value. Just draws you a bunch of high premium cards, and eventually like a 5/6. That's a great finisher / value tool. So Splendor, you definitely want some like more removal, like because I won't say you're stressed to find it, but just more interaction just from hand. You can just drop this down pre overflow for some interaction when you're sort of just getting from like turn 5 and turn 6 where it's a bit awkward. That's the most awkward time for Dragon because they're not an overflow and they don't have too many unfair things going for them. So just more interaction is very good. So that's why Splendor gets a buff. And then just like random disdain's not a thing you're trying to trigger, but random lethals here and there sometimes happen. But it's mainly just for having more removal for you, which is why I give it the bump. And your 4-drops, you'll all be very happy to take these, especially with Dragon. It doesn't have that Basilisk anymore. Geovore is fine and all, but it's definitely no Basilisk rider. So again, these premium 4s you'll be very happy to take since you can dodge evoing like double 2s, which sometimes you end up having good ones, but mainly just to dodge getting the Griffin back to evo on 4. So these ones will definitely be high premiums to take. And same thing, the removal. You have the tail swings, which I'm not saying you're hesitant to take. But these are all competing with Tailswing, and you don't want too many. So again, they're still up there just because they're in your neutral picks. And you'll be very happy to take them since they all have their nice upsides. All right, so I guess that's it for Dragoncraft. I'm back in the mix of things. The next one should come out a lot sooner. I had a lot of stuff on the weekend and some random stuff. But again, thanks for listening, and I'll catch you guys for the next one.